Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is a very good video game that I wrote the guide on. I've even talked about this before in the past. You should go check that out if you haven't already. Now, at the time of recording that video, all of the pages were done. They looked great, they functioned how I wanted them to, they were pretty good. But there was one page that I hadn't even thought to start yet, and that was the Tattle log. The Tattle log is an enemy repository that you fill out by using the move Tattle in battle. And it fills out this menu here. Gives you some enemy statistics, and it gives you some help to understand the enemy, maybe how to fight them or what their weaknesses might be. It took a lot of planning and fighting with my boss and learning CSS and crying because I had to use CSS on tables, but here's the end result. The normal view is very short, and it just shows you the same stuff that the regular Tattle log would in the menu. But if you click expand, it gives you a whole lot more information that isn't directly stated in the game, but helps you understand the enemy a lot more completely. This isn't the prettiest thing in the world, but it's a hell of a lot better than the source information. I think that this is a pretty good compromise. That said, I spent so much time looking at all of this information and all the little details that there's some pretty interesting stuff in here.
I promise this is interesting. Just hear me out.
Let's start with some version differences. There's the GameCube game and the Switch game, and I'm going to focus on the US English versions. I'm sure other languages have plenty of changes in them, but I don't speak other languages, and I wouldn't get the nuance of some of those changes, so I'm not going to go into them here. All of these enemies here have some form of change in their description. They can be really minor. Some of them literally just add or remove hyphens or change capitalization. And some of them radically change what the enemy actually says. I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but I've pulled out a couple of the highlights. We'll start here. On the top, it lists the GameCube description, and on the bottom, it's going to list the Switch description. For Paragoombas, it changes, but once it's damaged, it gets its wings clipped to if you jump on it or squish it down, it gets its wings clipped. This is true. Paragoombas can sustain damage and still remain flying. It's only if you make physical contact with the thing that they lose their wings and come to the ground. Something like the burn condition, they take 1 point of damage, they'll still be flying in the air. For Shady Koopas, they clarify it's not when they flip getting back up from their back, it's when they flip to their back that they have access to their special all powerful move. This is a really helpful clarification, and the same is true for the Shady Paratroopas as well. Dark Paratroopas inexplicably gain a sentence explaining that they lose their wings if you jump on them, but by the time you run into these things, you should probably already know that. So it's a really weird addition for the Switch version. Amazy Daisy removes the line about being almost impossible to beat. I guess they learned that no, they're actually quite possible to beat and people do it for fun. And then it changes it to something good might happen if you can defeat it. So perhaps they're incentivizing us to eliminate an already rare population. Let's talk about plants. Putrid piranhas have changed their terminology to no longer say it will poison your allies, but instead it will poison its opponents. Okay, I guess it's just trying to make it sound more encyclopedic. It's talking about its opponents, not necessarily you, Mario, or inherently you, the player. In the GameCube game, frost piranhas didn't have a breath attack like all the other piranha plants do. However, they regain that attack in the Switch version, and their initial bite attack doesn't freeze anymore. So this is a very interesting clarification because of the new move. Only the breath attack can freeze you now. Embers, lava bubbles, and phantom embers all gain the final sentence in their descriptions here. basically saying if you attack it with fire, something horrible will happen. Even though the game has beat you upside the head saying that over and over again. Don't do it. Don't do it. You probably shouldn't do it. This is just another way that they're saying don't do it. I think they're just trying to rain on my parade. Hooktail, unsurprisingly, changes that it doesn't like crickets to frogs. They also, interestingly, reveal her gender while talking about her instead of it being like a big surprise when talking to Gloomtail later in the game. Speaking of pronouns, Bonetail has changed to using she, her pronouns as well.
In this house, we stand for the flag.
Smorg adds a line at the end of its description to say that you can't damage the body until you defeat the tentacles. Marilyn's description no longer suggests taking her out first in battle, which is a very interesting decision. Secondarily, it adds a little bit of lore about how Beldam and Vivian can understand her, but we sure can't. Most of these changes, they make sense. They clarify confusing things, or they make fighting the enemies a whole lot easier. Keyword is most. Bald clefs are no longer described to have a swarthy looking face, they just have a sharp, craggy one. I've literally never heard this word used outside of this game for this enemy description. It's such a strange choice to have used to begin with, but then they change it again. Bowser's original GameCube description for his second fight was inexplicably Scottish. That is no longer the case. They just talk about, oh, watch out for Kammy Koopa. He's the Koopa King. Oh no. Little less fun than just directly insulting the guy. But maybe it's not wise to have an encyclopedia where you actively insult its constituents. Could just be me. This one, I'll admit, might just be a personal thing, but I feel like I'm going crazy, so I have to talk about it. Chain chomps no longer are described by having somewhat low HP, they just have low HP. And that irks me. Chain chomps have 7 health, which to me is not low. On the grand scale of things, it's probably close to the middle, excluding like bosses and all that. Like just standard enemies. Seven's gotta be like the halfway point. I guess it makes sense for the area that it's in. You know, it's got the lowest health out of most of the enemies that it surrounds, but it's still just such a strange thing to say that it has low health. And with 5 defense, I mean, you still have to whack it a little bit harder. So I don't know. I just don't understand why they would say it has low HP to begin with, but then say it doesn't have somewhat low HP either. It's definitive. It must have low HP now. I don't get it. Beldam during the second fight explicitly now says that she pressured Dupless into joining the group. I wonder how he feels about that. Some of the descriptions that they have in this thing are just kind of interesting. Doesn't really matter what version that you're looking at. Speaking of Dupless, it pretty consistently uses it, he pronouns. All of the descriptions here, whether that's Goombella or the Tattle itself, regardless if it's the Switch version or the GameCube version, really hammer down using it pronouns and then occasionally sprinkling he in there like Parmesan cheese.
In this house, we stand for the flag.
Interestingly enough, Dark Craws also have it he pronoun use. Same goes for both versions, same goes for having descriptions from Goombella and the book itself.
In this house, we stand for the flag.
Yuxes are canonically pathetically ugly. That is their textbook definition, is that they are pathetically ugly, and that's tragic. Tarantulas and piters are only ever described as spider-like, but not explicitly saying that they are spiders. I suppose that makes them different things entirely, But who knows what their actual goal is with that? Relatedly, swoopulas act the same way, of being described as a bat like thing instead of just calling it a bat. What is a swoopula then? You might notice some new pink text on this slide. That's because it belongs to the Yapper. Goombella adds her own opinions when using Tattle in battle, and so her descriptions won't match what the Tattle log says. Most people probably don't care that much, but she just seems so excited to tell us. How could I skip her? Goombella finds bald people ugly. I had to start with this one. It's just too good to pass up. Bald clefs are a go. Something that Goombella says that the Tattle log doesn't is bringing up the same thing that you read in the letter during this chapter. If Hooktail is losing, she'll plead for her life and do whatever it takes to try and get a counterattack in on you. During fights against Dark Koopa Trolls and Chain Chomps, Goombella mentions that they don't look like they sleep very often. This is actually reflective of how likely they are to be put to sleep in battle. It's one of the lowest stat points for Dark Koopa Trolls, and Chain Chomps can't be put to sleep at all. What else does she know? When tattling a lava bubble, Goombella says that its attack power and HP might be the same from an Embers, but it's otherwise the same.
Um, Technically, no, they're not.
Lava bubbles, when defeated in battle, can drop 1, 2, or 3 coins. They can also hold a power punch, HP drain, or super shroom in battle. Embers, on the other hand, can only hold power punch, but they can drop 1 through 4 coins. Additionally, Embers have an attack that lava bubbles don't, where they hit both of the opponents at the same time. They're not the same, Goombella. You've lied to me. While we're discussing being a liar liar plants for hire, when discussing Bobulks, which are found in the Pit of 100 Trials, she says it's easily the biggest babomb she's ever seen. But bulky babombs, which are found in Chapter 5, are larger. What is she talking about? One of the more interesting changes is that the GameCube has a limitation on text length, and so Bombshell Bill Blasters get abbreviated. She outright says it when talking about them in battle. In the Switch version, that's no longer the case, so they get rid of that line. One thing to know about Goombella is that she loves POW blocks. A lot. For Koopa Troopas, Bald Clefs, and Spinies, POW blocks are explicitly mentioned by name to use against these enemies to help defeat them. This is kind of unusual because almost any other time an item is recommended to fight an enemy, it just says use an item, such as the case for Bristles. So why explicitly say this? For Koopa Troopas and Bald Clefs, I suppose it makes sense. In Chapter 1, the path to Schwank Fortress has a bunch of POW blocks on it, and the shop nearby also sells them. Cool, makes sense. But Spinies are a little odd. At this point, you're fighting them in Chapter 3. There have been no POW blocks up to this time, and in fact, POW blocks never appear again, ever, except on the moon in the Switch version. It's unlikely you would even have a POW block at this point, so it's a strange thing to bring up now. There's pretty much no other case where an item is explicitly listed by Goombella to use. It's only POW blocks, and I don't get that. We've been spending all of our time looking up here for the log descriptions, but there's a lot of other information here. So we're gonna move on down here and start talking about the statistics. Alright, I'm gonna be real. The details around the statistics are kind of complicated, but I'll do my best to break it down for you. For lava bubbles, which I had pictured, let's use the odds to get immobilized. There's actually two probabilities at play here. There's the odds that the move that you're using will inflict the status condition, and that the enemy will receive that status condition. That 90% chance to be immobilized is the lava bubble's chance that it will become immobilized. But the stopwatch item only has a 95% chance to succeed in delivering the immobilization. We're only going to focus on the enemy statistics to receive status conditions, because they're the ones that are a little more weird. And oh boy, do they get weird. To start, enemies that are flying or otherwise hovering off the ground are significantly more susceptible to being made dizzy or impacted by gale force. Spiky enemies or ones with high defense have a much higher chance to be made tiny or soft. But what the hell does that mean anyway? It's time to talk about status conditions. There's 22 sort of status conditions in the game. Basically, they're modifiers that do something. Enemies can have status conditions. You and your partner can have status conditions. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Out of the sort of kind of 22, only about 8 of them actually matter for what we care about in terms of inflicting upon enemies. Burned, confused, dizzy, freeze/frozen, sleep, soft, stop, sometimes called immobilized, and tiny. They're all listed here with a little explanation of what they do. There's a lot more nuance to that, but it's the general gist of what those status conditions do. In addition to those 8 status conditions, there's 3 other things that we'll be tracking. Gale Force, which is the move from Flurry to instantly blow enemies away from battle. Fright, which is a Fright Mask item, which can scare enemies away from battle. And Showstopper. It inflicts a status called Knockout or KO, but it makes more sense to just call it Showstopper. Every single enemy has a different chance for all 11 of these different conditions to work or fail. Let's talk about it. By far the strangest status effect is burned. Virtually every enemy in the game that can be burned has a 100% chance of burning. Doesn't matter. Anything that's fireproof, like a bald cleft, it has no chance to burn. But anything that isn't fireproof, like a Paragoomba, 100% chance to burn as long as the move that you're using can deliver it. Something like a Fire Flower or using the badge Fire Drive, for example. In fact, there's only 4 enemies that don't fit this mold, which is Red Bones, which only has a 90% chance to be burned, and Spinias, Spanias, and Spunnias, which have a 150% chance of being burned. This doesn't make any sense at all. Why would you give these probabilities if most of the probabilities are it will burn or it will not burn? Just make it a Boolean value. Koopa Troopas and KP Koopas. The shadow government wants you to think that they're the same thing. But a clever eye reading the Tattle log will say only their abilities are the same. Let's take a closer look. KP Koopas are only found in the Glitz Pit. The way that the Glitz Pit handles items and reward drops and stuff like that is really, really weird. And so most of the exclusive enemies to the Glitz Pit just don't hold any item rewards at all. To make up for this, KP Koopas have a chance of dropping 2 coins instead of just 1, whereas Koopa Troopas have a lot of items they can be holding in battle or can drop once defeated. Secondarily, KP Koopas are a little more resistant to receiving a lot of status effects. They're about 10% less likely to be confused, dizzy, frozen, scared away from a fright mask, blown away with gale force, put to sleep, or immobilized in time. That technically makes KP Koopas just a little bit stronger than an average Koopa Troopa.
So they're lying to you. They are different after all.
Wonder what they put in the paint on those shells. These resistances are also different from Shady Koopas and Dark Koopas, so all four of them are completely different entities in terms of what their resistances might be. KP Koopas are actually kind of the only enemy with this distinction. The other similar case, which is Spike Tops and Red Spike Tops, which are only found in the Glitz Pit, don't drop items, like I've said prior, but they also have a lower chance to drop coins. All of their resistances to status effects are exactly the same as Spike Tops. Very, very strange choice to make KP Koopas just a little more buff. King K had it going on after all. I also want to bring up Bald Cliffs. Now, their statistics aren't terribly crazy or anything, but it's the fact that some of these status conditions are, if not extremely unlikely to be seen, outright impossible. Burn, Sleep, and Fright are all items that you could just buy in shops. Fire Flower, Sleepy Sheep, Fright Mask. The stop effect can also be inflicted by using the mystery that you find in Petal Meadows. That knocks off 4 of them pretty easily. There's also a chance that a bucket can fall down from the stage and inflict dizziness upon these guys, or by using a dizzy dial. But the remaining status conditions, there's no easy way to inflict them on a Bald Cleft. You don't have Flurry, you don't have Showstopper, you can't use Zest or access the other 2 shops of Rogueport at this point in time, or any other shops for that matter, and none of the badges in the Lovely House inflict statuses at this point. While sequence breaking does exist, on a casual playthrough, nobody's going to freeze a Bald Cleft or make it soft or any of those things. So it's really funny that they built in those resistances despite the fact that they'll never be seen. Bald Clefts are only fought once on the path to Schwank Fortress and never again. So anything prior to that point in Chapter 1 or the prologue is all you'll have access to use against these guys. This actually rings true of several other enemies like the Gold Fuzzy or the Blooper fight, but given the fact that they don't have such specific resistances, or you have more or fewer access to tools at that time, it's not nearly as interesting as what the Bald Clefs do. Most of the time, if an enemy has a probability greater than 0 to receive a status condition, it's going to be a decently large number. At least 40%, usually closer to 60, 70, 80% chance to succeed. But sometimes they get really small. For Fright Masks, Dull Bones, Elite Wizards, Frost Piranhas, and Piranha Plants all have a 10% chance to succeed. For Putrid Piranhas, that's 20% to succeed. Those are by far the lowest in the game without being 0. Why you would try and use these on this enemy? I don't know. Dull Bones being as early as they are in the game but such a low chance to succeed is also quite fascinating, given that the rest of these enemies are pretty darn late game.
Oh, and sorry, did you think I was done talking about plants?
All 4 of the plants in the Piranha Plant line have a very, very high chance to be put to sleep. Cool, a Mario 64 reference in my Paper Mario game. For once, the Sleepy Stomp badge might actually be useful, given the fact that all of them have a 100% plus chance to succeed. Doubled up with Bobolks also having a higher chance to be put to sleep, a Sleepy Sheep in the Pit of 100 Trials might not be the worst idea in the world to have. Yuxes are so weird. I know there's a lot of numbers here because I'm covering all 3 Yuxes and their mini Yux variants. But there's some really strange things going on. Can you see them? Original Yuxes cannot be burned. But Z-Yuxes and their respective mini Z-Yux can be burned. Mini Cross-Yuxes also can be burned. So they gained a weakness as they supposedly got better. Cross-Yuxes in general are just strange. They're completely immune to almost every status condition except for Showstopper. Most enemies that you'll find with variants or stronger versions will have very similar stats, but they sort of drop off as they get stronger, usually by 5%, 10%. You can see this in the difference between a Yux and a Z-Yux. Everything sort of goes down by 10. But in the case of the mini Cross-Yux, they either don't change statistics at all or violently plummet, like Confusion dropping to 10% from 80. That doesn't make any sense at all. And also, just in general, a Cross-Yux has some of the lowest chances for Showstopper to succeed in the entire game, ranking along with either really rare enemies or bosses. Also, mini Cross-Yuxes are the only one with a 25% chance to succeed. All three of the mini Yux variants have a very interesting statistic, which is that they can be made soft. This is strange. Softness reduces defense. But a mini Yux doesn't have any defense. This is actually true for a lot of enemies, like Paragoombas. You can make them soft, but it doesn't do anything, because they don't already have defense to go away. With how commonly enemies don't have any defense, that's not too surprising. But the part that is surprising is that all the mini Yuxes also can be made tiny. Tiny reduces attack. This wouldn't matter though, because the mini Yuxes don't attack you and have an attack value of 0. This is a trait that they share with both of the Bill Blasters, which can also be made tiny for some reason. Making these things tiny doesn't make sense. They don't do anything. Finding out that the Bill Blasters can be made tiny is actually what inspired me to make this video, because it's so weird. In general, Boos and Crazy Daisies have some of the lowest probabilities to inflict status conditions upon. They even rival some of the later game enemies, like Elite Wizards.
What kind of power does this thing hold?
Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door has elemental attacks, and no one talks about it ever. I feel like I'm crazy whenever I bring it up and people don't know what I'm talking about. There's 4 different types of elemental attacks: fire, explosions, ice, and lightning. I don't quite remember Avatar going that way. Lightning is by far the least interesting of the 4. It only impacts Rough Puffs.
That's it.
The only time that lightning will ever matter to you is when fighting Rough Puffs. The other 3 that matter are fire, explosions, and ice. It's not quite like Pokemon where there's a one beats the other sort of deal. They just sort of interact with each other in different ways. Fire enemies, such as lava bubbles and embers, can't be frozen or burned. They take extra damage from ice attacks or when Mario has the ice power badge, and they heal if they get attacked with fire. Conversely, ice enemies like ice puffs and frost piranhas can't be frozen. They take extra damage from fire attacks, and they get healed when you attack them with ice. Explosive enemies, Bob-ombs, Bob-omb-likes, usually instantly blow up if you hit them with fire, other explosions, or lightning, but their fuse will get put out if you freeze them. The really annoying thing about this is that there's very few enemies that actually are impacted by elemental damage, and this isn't like a consistent thing. Sometimes enemies might get impacted in different ways by these elemental conditions. This is just sort of the general average. The methods to actually inflict this elemental damage is also really small. Fire can generally only be delivered by using Fire Drive, Vivian's Fiery Jinx, or using a Fire Flower item. Conversely, ice can only be delivered with Ice Smash, using the Ice Power badge, or an Ice Storm item. Admiral Bobbery is the only way that you can inflict explosion damage, and lightning can only come from items, be it Thunderbolt or Thunder Rage. All of these enemies are fireproof. In addition, if you use a fire move on any of those ember types, they'll actually heal from it. But weep no wider, because Fire Bros, you can still set them on fire. These enemies can't be hurt by explosions. That's all to say about that. And finally, all 4 of these enemies are ice-proof. I don't understand why chain chomps are immune to ice, but not explosions. It just seems like a weird oversight to me. But honestly, that's all the interesting things there is to say about elemental stuff. It's brought up semi-frequently in the Tattle log, but never explained. And there's so few ways to actually interact with it that it generally doesn't matter. Alright, I think that's all the interesting things I have to say about the Tattle log. When you look at all the numbers and words and statistics and data, it starts to do some horrible things to your mind and body. Like make a YouTube video for people to watch. Thanks for doing that, by the way. I hope that I can actually, make more this year. Wouldn't that be fun? Share with your friends. Share with your enemies. Share with all the 1,000-Year Door nerds who are going to watch this and go, wow, I already knew 2/3 of that. But maybe you found it interesting or humorous, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.